So I'm 13 years old, and so there's some things you kind of forget that were really a big part of your life, and then you're not doing that for a long time, so you forget, right? So the majority of my summers and my weekends I was spent being in the Boy Scouts of America. It's not one of those Boy Scouts of America stories, so no need to get tense. But so I'm 13 years old, I'm at scout camp, and to just preface how scout camp works, there's like maybe 5 adults that run the camp, and then all the counselors are like 16 or 14. And you don't realize that, like when you're a scout, you're like, oh, they're adults. And you're like, no, this is a 14-year-old, and I'm 15, and he's teaching me how to shoot a bow into that fake deer, and I think he's an adult, but he's not. And so I spent a long time in scouts. I got my Eagle Scout, like I did the whole 9 yards. I don't regret it, but I really enjoyed it. But there was also a lot of terrible stories, and I could go on and on about all the different things that happened. But the one story I'm focusing on is, so I'm 13, I'm at this camp, and I'm getting my camping merit badge. And to do the camping merit badge, when you're at scout camp, you have to go to outpost. And this was not communicated to me because Boy Scouts is run by a whole bunch of either middle-aged men or teenagers, so communication is kind of a difficult thing to happen there. So no one tells me, hey, you got to bring your own tent. No one tells me, hey, you got to bring it packed, that you can pack all your stuff in for an overnight thing. So you're in the scout camp, then you hike 2 miles up the mountain to get to the outpost camp, and luckily someone else in my troop had a big, huge 8-man tent. It was only a 2-mile hike, so we take the tent and we're going up. And I remind you, the authoritative figures there, oldest was maybe 15, 16, right? So there's like 20 boys ranging from 12 to 16, and there's 3 of us that are helping with this 8-man tent. And so we get up there, we set up the tent, and then we learn that this big, huge storm is coming. So like, it's fine, it's whatever, we knew we were gonna get wet. And the whole time, no one really taught me how to backpack at that point. I'm 13, right? So I brought like a gallon of water, because I was like, I'll need water. I carry a gallon of water for 2 miles. I hate my life, right? And I'm already wet, and I'm like 13, and I'm like, I want to go home. And if you've ever been to scout camp, all you want to do is go home, because you just clench your butt cheeks so you don't have to go poop in the terrible outhouses that they have, because you're going to get some sort of venereal disease or something. And so I'm at outpost. We set up the tents. There's like these 2 huge tents. One of them is mine that I'm in, and then all these little like 2-man tent pup tents. And this one boy in my troop, he has set up this 2 children tent, but it's really a 1-man tent, and there's 2 of them in there. And so those 2 are in that tent, and they don't have a rain fly, but they're like, it's fine. Because again, the most authoritative figure is 16. And so we get set up, we have some s'mores, we don't really bring any food because we're just there for the night. And so we're getting ready, we're getting in bed, and I have brought this huge, thick wool sleeping bag, and I set up my space. I'm like, this is my space. No one's moving it, right? And it's very important for us, the story. So then it starts to rain. And the counselors, the authoritative figures, when it starts to rain, they just went in their tents, and we didn't see them until like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning when we would get up to leave. So they're gone, and they don't intervene until 4 o'clock in the morning. It's 7 o'clock at night, so those hours we're just free to do whatever we want. So, but we're all in our tents because it's pouring down rain, and we don't know what to do. And the one boy has abandoned the 2 children tent and has joined our tent, and he's in our tent. So there's 3 of us in an 8-man tent. We have all the room in the world. Someone has brought a bag of candy. We're just eating food and talking. And then it starts to pour down rain, pour down rain, pour down rain. And so then it starts to flood, right? But we have an 8-man tent, so the water goes underneath, it was fine. But then one by one, each tiny little tent starts to collapse or flood or fill with water. And so all these soaked boys start like, do you guys have room? Do you guys have room? And so the 2 tents start to just bring in the masses. And the only tents that survived were the counselors' tents and then these 2 tents. And so we're filled to capacity. I still have my space. No one has touched my wool sleeping bag. My socks are really important to keep dry when you get wet, because that's like the only thing that my boots are right next to me. My socks are in the boots so they won't get wet at all. I'm completely dry still. And I went throughout the whole night staying dry, but that was nice. But the boy that was in is still in the 1-man tent, that is 2 children tent, and there's no rain fly, and he's very stubborn. And so he finally gets up and says, hey, and we're full. Like, we have like 15 boys in an 8-man tent. I still have my space. I'm still dry, and I'm not moving. And so he starts knocking, and we're like, we can't fit you. And he goes, we're like, go to the other tent. And then the other tent, they get abrasive because, again, there's only 16-year-olds, they're authoritative figures, so like just curse words and insults are flying, and we're Boy Scouts, and we all have too many knives and too little authoritative figures around us. And so luckily there's an older guy in our tent, and he like kind of calms things down, and the boy just starts getting really mad. The boy he doesn't have a place to sleep. We're like, I'm staying in my space and I'm not getting involved, because if I get up to go and like help with the situation, open the door or whatever, I lose my space, I lose my dryness, I lose my happiness, right? And so I'm just listening, and he's getting mad. He starts to like try and open our tent, and we're like, no, and everyone's like, you can't come into the tent, we're full, and like it's standing room only, and then my space. So there's like standing room only, and then my space, and everyone else is soaked, and I'm just dry, and I'm not moving. And so he starts to just get really mad, and he starts yelling, quiet, people are trying to sleep, and he goes, if you do not let me into this tent, I will pee all over this tent. And so we're like, no you won't, stop. And then we hear a different liquid noise besides rain, and this boy starts to just pee all over the tent, and it's not oh, I've been drinking a lot of water pee, it's, oh, I've been at scout camp for 3 days, and I'm only having bug juice and terrible sausages kind of pee. So it reeks. And then he digs a hole right next to our tent, and he says, I'm taking a dump in this hole if you do not let me into this tent. And he takes a dump in the hole, and then he gets quiet. So it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, no one is sleeping, and it's so quiet. And we don't know where this boy is. We're like, okay, he's in his tent. And I know the kid really well. And like, he would have just caused issues. It would have just been amazing. Like, he pooped and peed, like in hearing vicinity, in like audio, like we heard it. He had no shame. And I wanted my space to stay my space. I wanted my socks. I wanted to be fine. And so we finally fall asleep for 15 minutes, and then we wake up, and it's 3 o'clock, and the counselors, who have been nowhere for this whole issue, wake us up, and they're like, we gotta go, we gotta pack up. And so we're packing up, and the boy's gone. And so he's missing. We're 2 miles up into this mountain, and he's gone. And so we pack up, and we start to do the 2 mile. We look everywhere. His tent's gone, his stuff is gone, but it has rained all night. And so we get our stuff up, and we pack everything up, and we carry down. Everything's soaked. I'm dry. Everyone else is soaked. But I take a turn. I carry the 8-man tent. We get down, and these 16-year-old counselors are like, what are we going to do? We've lost a child, a human being. And so protocol on scouts, at the scout camp, is if you lose someone, they sound this huge alarm, which is like and it's 4:30 in the morning. So like everyone is still sleeping. And they sound the alarm, and everyone has to line up in your patrols, and the patrol leader counts all the different scouts and everything like that. So it's a whole ordeal. It's 4:30 in the morning. We're looking. I just want to go home. And the irony of it is that no one checked his home, and we spent 2.5 hours looking for this boy, and he is sleeping in his tent at his campsite, and no one checked it. And no one looked for him. Well, we looked for him plenty, but we thought, no, he's missing. No, he had gotten all of his stuff. He had gotten his socks, which he had also kept dry, and he hiked 2 miles in the dark at 2 in the morning just so he could go home and get in his tent and fall asleep. And that is one of my many stories from Scout.